We have two very talented and wonderful individuals here, and so I would ask you to join me in welcoming them as they come take their seats.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm just going to give a quick introduction. Something to sort of set the context and let you all know what happens in Topeka before we get into specific issues. In both chambers in 2019, 660 bills were introduced in both chambers. 62 bills were presented to the governor for her signature. She signed all, but she vetoed 3, and 1 was passed without her signature. 660 bills, 62 were brought to her desk. As you all know, this is kind of Civics 101. In the House of Representatives in Kansas, you have to have 63 votes, a simple majority, to pass a bill on it. In the Senate, you have to have 21. If the governor vetoes it, it's 2/3, so that's 27 in the Senate and 84 in the House. For 2020, 49 bills sit on the calendar, and that means of those 660, there are still 49 that went through the whole committee process, and they're sitting below the line, is what we call it, and they could be raised up at any time for us to vote on. There's 28 committees in the House, there's 15 in the Senate, and so that's a little overview so you understand what we're facing in 2020. So I would just say buckle your seatbelts. This is going to be a jet tour through the Kansas Legislature 2020. Gene's going to go first.
Thank you, Susan. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having us. Merry Christmas to you. We have 12 standing committees in the Senate that principally do the work of the Senate. And I do sit on 4. I chair the Senate Public Health and Welfare. So what I'm going to do, we're going to go back and forth here on subjects, and then at the end take questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down those committees, and the first committee is Assessment and Taxation. So with that, the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group meets twice a year, and they met on November 7th, just last month. They're estimating for the 2 years.
So we get to use that live.
Okay.
Or fit video.
Oh, that's one on the video?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. We can go back, no problem.
Thank you.
Okay. Guess they want to hear me too. For the 2 years upcoming, the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group estimates that we'll take in an additional $510 million. And not only is that attributable to the Trump economy, but it's also attributable to the significant tax increase that we've had over the last year, the retroactive tax increase. So for 2019, that amount is $220 million, and the balance in 2020. So again, tax revenue is coming in well above estimates for those 2 primary reasons. There are others, but those are the 2 primary reasons: the tax increase and the Trump economy. The other items on the tax agenda is the Kansas Chamber came out with a study of the state, and over the next year, next session and the session after that, they're going to look at the low-hanging fruit and try to come up with areas where they feel like we really can make some significant improvements. And I would highly encourage you, and I'll get it to John, but this booklet just came out last Tuesday. They introduced it in the Capitol, and it's got some great information, a lot of historical information to kind of tell you how we got where we're at, but a lot of information on what we need to do and what we need to address. Tax and spending in Kansas has grown faster than inflation and population in the last 2 years, after taking the account of the tax cuts in 2012. State tax collections rose 35% from 2000 to 2017, but state spending grew 69%. So it's a sizable imbalance on what we're doing and how we're doing it. We're going to face, and I'll talk a little bit about the budget towards the end, but we're going to face a declining budget and a shortfall here fairly quick. Again, the other things that I want to suggest on this is that perhaps the Pachyderm Club would get this book and divide it up, or take the course of next year and look at the topics that they're mentioning in here and have a dialogue and get us some information on what your thoughts are. They are addressing everything: corporate income tax, individual income tax, sales tax, property tax, everything that's in there. So it's a lot of good information. Take your time to read it, a lot of historical information, and we need to hear from you. We need to hear from you on where you think we should move either tax rates or tax revenue as we go along. We'll probably look at the low-hanging fruit this year because, again, we start 31 days from today. We always start the session on the second Monday of January, so we will start session January 13th of next year. So that's a little bit on tax and assessment. Go ahead.
So the one thing we have to do in the legislature is pass a budget, but I will tell you the number one priority of the session coming up has to do with the reverse the ruling life amendment. I cannot overestimate to you the gravity of this issue. It's kind of well known, the House and the Senate, especially the leadership, don't always agree on everything, but in this case, they are so unified that this is the number one priority. Okay, so what is it? I think you all know a little bit, but I'll just review it. In April, the Kansas Supreme Court came out with the worst possible ruling. Derek Smith stood here and explained it to you all several months ago. And he said that this decision said there's a right to abortion was discovered in the Kansas Constitution. Basically, this would unregulate abortion in the state of Kansas. There would be no safety standards for the mother, no informed consent, no binding taxpayer-funded abortion, no parental consent for minors. If we let this go, because those regulations that have been passed in Kansas over the past many years, there's over 20 of them, they would probably be found unconstitutional if they were challenged, which they will be challenged. So we have to act now. And to safeguard the mother has to do with health standards, safety, and also for the unborn child. So the remedy is to pass a clear and clarifying amendment that says there's no right to abortion in the Kansas Constitution, and that the regulations that we have put in place are still constitutional. The myth you're going to hear, the opponents are going to say, oh, you're trying to completely do away with Roe v. Wade in Kansas, and that's not true. What we're trying to do is just go back to what we had before April, which is there are regulations in place. Yes, would it be awesome to completely have it gone? Yes. But what we have to do now is just make sure those regulations stay in place. There's two parts. The first part is in the House and the Senate, we have to pass a resolution, and that's 84 in the House and 27 in the Senate. I think in the Senate, we're not going to have any trouble with 27. In the House, it is a razor-thin margin, and it will need to be bipartisan. I think right now there are groups that are unifying, meeting, like even as we speak, with a few Democrats in the House to help them see that we need to pass this amendment. And so once we pass a resolution saying this will be on the ballot, which, by the way, the Kansas City Star said, yes, let the people decide what they want. That's all we're saying is let's put it on the ballot and let the people of Kansas decide. Once it's on the ballot, then we will have a statewide vote on it. And that's where you all come in. For the first part, need to be talking to your representatives and your senators and let them know you absolutely want them to vote on the resolution. And then the second part is once it's on the ballot, then there will be a whole education campaign so that we distill those myths. So again, yes, the budget, all of that is very important, but this has been said by the leadership of the House and the Senate. This is a #1 priority for 2020.
So as Susan mentioned, we have to have a supermajority in both chambers, and so the governor does not get to weigh in on this. But we need a simple majority at the statewide election. And I've not visited with Susan and others, but I think it's something that, you know, we all need to debate and discuss this a little bit, is that when do we have that vote? Do we have it in the primary or do we have it in the general? And so when we get to questions, I would like to hear some thoughts on your part on where you feel like that should be placed, because there's going to be significant differences. You all know what's going to happen in the general. The president, congressional senator, all the 4 congressional districts, the Senate, the full Kansas Senate and the House. So I'd really like to get some input from you all on where you think that should be placed, primary or general. The next item I've got is commerce. Arizona passed some great legislation here last year, and it has to do with licensing. And what they did was they simply said that if you're licensed in another state and you're in good standing, you can come to work in Arizona immediately. We have different educational requirements and licensing requirements than many other states. They're all different somewhat. So in commerce, we're going to take a little bit closer look on what those requirements are. And we're going to pass the same or similar type legislation here. If you're a licensed professional in Oklahoma and you want to practice in Kansas, come do it. We want your business, we want your employment, we want your work. So what they did was, currently, if you have a license or a certification in another state in the same discipline and you are in good standing, you can be licensed in Kansas. At least for the year, so that you can go ahead and begin meeting either the educational requirements or whatever necessary requirements are to meet our standards. Last year in public health, we passed a reciprocal agreement with Missouri and Oklahoma on allowing healthcare workers to work across state line, because we need them very badly. There's rural areas out there where they wanted to participate and help on our side of the border, and we more than welcome that. So from architecture to barbers to contractors to dentists to geologists to nurses to surgeons to pharmacists, all these practices, we'll take a close look, make sure that, you know, we feel like those that are necessary can automatically get licensing and do business in the state of Kansas, and welcome that.
I'd like to add here, I think you all know this, but this, especially what Gene just said, gives us a picture that we love talking about the federal government, and it's so fascinating, so interesting, but what happens in the state government affects our day-to-day lives so much. Just everything, I feel like so many things that we do. Okay, the next thing I'd like to bring up is criminal justice reform. And that really is a bipartisan issue, which I think is awesome, but I think the Republicans need to be the ones leading in that. We have the Criminal Justice Reform Commission that has been working hard. They're going to continue to meet, but so far already, they've worked hard and they have some recommendations for us. Again, low-hanging fruit is what we're looking for in this next session in criminal justice reform. And by the way, Mark Bennett is the chairman, and our own Stephen Owens is the vice chairman of that committee. So Wichita is very well represented. Some of the things that they're going to bring up that they're recommending for this session, it goes hand in hand with some of the mental illness things that I think maybe Gene's going to talk about. You're going to talk about mental health?
Yes.
Okay, so, but some of the special recommendations have some specialty prisons initiatives so that some of the buildings that are already there, we are able to refit those to take from the general population. It might be a geriatric, it might be mental health, it might be substance abuse. Take care of that in some extra facilities have some ID relief. As I don't know if you all know what people go through when their driver's license are revoked, but there's 90-day waiting periods, there's fees upon fees. Loosen that up a little bit so people can get their driver's license, drive to work, get back to work. And that's a huge help in criminal justice reform. Sharing data, taking inventory of the initiatives that are going on locally and statewide so that we can coordinate, especially dealing with mental health and substance abuse. Lots of adjustments on our sentencing grid. Of course, all of that takes funding, and that's something that we'll be looking at. But for the moment, or for this next session, I think there are good suggestions coming out of that commission that we'll be able to pick and choose from and implement to give some relief in that area.
Just to add to that on the topic of mental health, I'm not sure if you know, but our largest mental health facility here in Sedgwick County is the Sedgwick County Jail. I was on a group that was looking at what we could do, not only here in Sedgwick County, but replicate it in Shawnee and Wyandotte and a few of the larger metropolitan areas. But San Antonio in Bexar County has done an excellent job in identifying the mental health problems we have out there on the street. And they slot these people based on their analysis, and then they run them through a course. And they have a whole campus down there. San Antonio is a very touristy destination, and they were having a problem along the river, and they all got together, and they did get a sizable contribution right out of the chute to help them get this started. But a lot of states have worked on trying to replicate that in their own state to address the mental health problems we got there. So it's going a little slower than what I'd hoped, because not only is it a mental health problem, but it's a court problem, and it's a hospital problem. They tie up the courts, they tie up the hospitals, all at your expense. So it is a big problem. I'll address it again on down the line, but I just wanted to add that real quick. Back on commerce real quick, we have not had an economic study since I think 1986, and I'm talking about really broad-based, in-depth study on the state in its entirety. That's going to be undertaken here next year and the year after, and hope for results in the 2021 legislature. Again, I'm gonna get some information to John and get it out to you, but we want to know again where you stand on some things, whether it's tax credits or a lot of different issues that are going to come out of that study. We do have to be very careful. The Commerce Secretary that we currently have has got a team together to oversee that process. And I think it's very imbalanced. So we'll have a jaundiced eye on what he's doing and how he's doing it, and make sure that they're examining areas that are critical to the state and get the right study out so we know to do long term.
Something that I think we have to highlight and mention is education. It's always something that comes up in the Kansas Legislature. So several years ago, the court said we are failing the bottom 25% of students. And that gap is growing, by the way. So we, the legislature, gave more money for that specific purpose. Now we know, and it's been in the paper even this week, that the dollars that we specifically provided for at-risk students have been used for the general population. There was a post-audit report that said just a tiny bit is going straight for those at-risk students. So the fact is, what we will focus on this next session as far as education goes is accountability. It's on the statutes how they're supposed to use that money. It's not being used that way. We need to put pressure on, it's a whole group of organizations that we need to put pressure on. The school boards, the superintendents, the Department of Education, state school board. So we want to zero in on accountability so that they comply with those statutes and what is already on the books. So it's really twofold, I think, what is coming up. Look at what was passed, follow that. Some of the things they have to do, clarity on their website, like where is that money being spent? Organization in their data. so that we can actually compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. Those things aren't being done yet, so it's that. And then a side note is that I feel like we need to look at creative ways to address that 25% of students that are failing. And it's education freedom for families, and tax credit scholarships, possibly education savings account for those students that are in those lowest, that lowest 25% that are at risk. So, and then we do get tax relief with the tax credit scholarship that we pass, and I just want to mention that to you all. It's the end of the year. You can get a tax credit on your Kansas state income tax by contributing to the scholarship granting organizations. It's a little bit complicated. It's not really, but I would love to explain more of that. But that's one of the things that are going to help those lowest 25% of the students, and us putting pressure on it for accountability.
Again, piggybacking on that a little bit, we have 286 school districts across the state. Smallest school district being roughly 67 students.
Seriously.
That's K through 12.
Yeah.
K through 12. One of the things that you're going to see in this tax booklet that the Kansas Chambers had produced with the Tax Foundation is the recommendation to realign some government operations, be they townships, cities, councils, and or certainly the administration of the 286 school districts. You know, I'm not sure if you've seen the NAEP scores, but we are now below Missouri. I got a lot of relatives and our family came from Missouri, but I'm still proud to be a Kansan, and we're now behind them. And it's a tragedy for the amount of money that we put in there, particularly the last 2 or 3 years and what's coming up. I think the school board, the state school board, the 10 school board members are really feeling the pressure now. When those assessments came out and it showed how poorly we were doing, they now realize that they've got to do something. And so there is a dialogue to look at how do we change the oversight of these districts without disrupting, you know, by closing all the school or a bunch of schools or killing off mascots or anything like that. We're not looking at that. We're looking at realigning the administrative processes. We have a system out there now that addresses special needs. They're cooperatives. We have a great one in Goddard, and there's several more around the state. And it's my contention that we need something similar to that for STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. We are not getting the best teachers out there to these students to excel in those particular lines of work. And you all know the amount of employment demand that we've got out there that are high quality manufacturers and others are needing people. So we're going to have to readdress how we do that and try to figure out the way to correct it. A couple of real side notes there I want to mention. I was at a school board meeting just this last Monday night and invited to attend. They also had high schoolers sitting there, and we had a great dialogue. And at one point, social media came up. What's the pressure of social media on high schoolers? They said it was a lot. It was intense. And how was it driving mental health in high schools? And anyway, we had a good discussion, but the superintendent said, and the question came up, well, what amount of access do they have to their phones and their tablets and so forth during school? And he said, unfettered. We let them have it all the time. Why not? Why should they be any different than what's out there in the real world? I think we have a disciplinary problem in our public schools. If you look at the private parochial schools out there, and you look at the achievement levels, there's a drastic difference. And it tells you why. It's just simply setting realistic rules for students to abide by and to perform. And I didn't address that particular issue the way he stated it, but I think it's because he couldn't control it. He couldn't control it, so we'll pass it off. Well, society's that way, so we'll let the students be that way, okay? Well, to me, that didn't make sense. One other thing, real quick. Another teacher, an elementary school teacher, was making comments, and sadly so, about students unprepared when they come from home to the first grades, kindergarten, first and second. They don't know how to hold a pencil. They don't know how to stand in line. They don't know how to sit in a chair. And I thought, when he was talking about this, and he got rather emotional, I thought, well, that's interesting. I'll bet you 90+% of those parents came out of government education. And here we are, 10, 15, 20 plus years later, these students are now in school, and they aren't learning what they need to learn at home. So again, re-examining the 286 school districts and trying to figure out how we can get the best education product into the classroom and compensate our teachers more.
Go ahead, do your next topic. I'm running out of
Okay.
topics, so
right.
Gene needs to go ahead and do another one. But
Well, I'm gonna give this back to her real quick because I'm gonna ask her to talk about online gambling and medical marijuana.
okay. Oh, thanks a lot. I serve on the Federal and State Affairs Committee, and those are two issues that we have been brought up there. So first of all, with the marijuana, I was on the interim committee. We met in October to specifically talk about marijuana, and we had lots of proponents and lots of opponents that came and spoke. And what the recommendations were at the end of the day, even though they're not binding, but they can be recommendations for what we need to look at in 2020, the recommendations were go slowly and look at what other states have done that seems to be successful. So I would say in 2020, I don't see any real action about marijuana. I feel like it's a mixed bag the way people feel about it. But I think, thankfully, we're going to go slow. And we're going to look at what other states have done and not jump to any conclusions. That's that. And then online gambling. Last year, there was an interim committee. There was a special committee. We have looked at it and looked at it. There's lots of different entities that want different things. The casinos, the professional leagues, the lottery in Kansas. So many different entities that are trying to speak into the online gambling. And last year, they could not come to any sort of agreement on what a bill should look like. So I've not been intimately involved in that topic as far as are they making progress right now. I assume we'll continue to try and look at it, but we haven't even had any formal, we've had informational hearings in federal and state affairs, but no actual hearings to vote on a proposed bill with online gambling. That may come up this session, but I'm thinking we're still muddling through it in Kansas, actually, and we're watching some of the other states to see are those revenues really coming in that were promised when they passed those bills? Are they not? What's going on? So again, I think we're being Kansans, we're being Midwest, and we're taking things slowly and looking at it to see it before we act on it.
On the issue of medical marijuana, last session in Public Health and Welfare, we passed a bill that allowed persons that had a certain level of THC and CBD oil in their possession, and was strictly having to do with being able to control seizures in children. This couple just from the Northwest here, a county or two away, had two children that were severely handicapped physically, and they were getting treatment out of state, and they asked if we would consider allowing certain level of THC and CBD oil so that they could pacify these two children. One of them had previously passed away, and since the legislation was passed, the other one has passed away as well. So in my committee, again, there will probably be quite a bit of emotion and desire to look at that and expand it. We're going to be very, very careful on it. But we have a senator that had a kidney transplant, and very fine person, very fine man. He's really disappointed in the medication, the opioids that he's getting to treat that for pain. And again, even if we don't all agree with it, he's a grown man. If we feel like a certain level of THC or something like that can relieve this gentleman's pain, I think I'm okay with that. I mean, you may feel different, you can let me know, but as a grown adult, I think that, it's something we ought to consider. Very, very closely monitored. That doesn't mean any production here. That doesn't mean any buying and selling here. But if they have access to it and they've got the authorization to have access to that by their physician, then I feel like they probably should. Other than that, I'm not for online gambling, but we're going to get it anyway. Want me to keep going?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. FI&I, financial institutions and insurance.
We'll
What-
do questions later.
One of the issues they're going to face in that arena is probably capers. Interest rates have come down. There was some projection that they would rise a little bit, but they have come down and moderated. Doesn't mean a return on investment in the stock market and elsewhere hasn't been fabulous. Hope all your 401ks are just bulging. But if they lower that interest rate factor that they use to solidify the account, then we become more exposed on our unfunded liability. We have worked hard over the last 6 to 8 years to address that unfunded liability. We were one of the worst in the country when I came in there in 2010. We are now in the upper third. So we want to maintain that and make sure that we don't get behind. Doesn't mean we have to, because they lowered that interest rate, overfund it, but we want to make progress to make sure that it remains stable. So again, some adjustment to capers, which is going to come out of the budget, may be necessary. I'll go on with public health. Medicaid expansion. There's the policy side, and then there's the political side. I'm sure you're pretty much aware of what happened in the House last year. House Bill 2066 got passed. There was a bill that was gutted. It was ruled non-germane in the House. The House body overruled the Rules Committee, and they inserted a Medicaid expansion bill into it, passed it out, and passed it over in the Senate. So it sits in my committee, as Susan described some of the bills that are still out there. House Bill 2066. We are very close in the Senate as to whether Medicaid expansion will pass or not. It is a lot of pressure for some rural senators, some good rural senators that have got some great hospitals in their districts. They go to town halls and get beat up all the time. So on the political side of this, Majority Leader Dan Hawkins in the House took a survey. And when people will really describe the true aspects of Medicaid expansion, which is able-bodied adults with no dependent children receiving health insurance, not health care, but health insurance. Everybody has health care now. You can go to the emergency room. But health insurance through a Medicaid expansion role under the ACA. It was overwhelming that, Republicans in particular did not care for that. But I took my own little survey, and those same persons also felt, you know what, if it's going to pass, we want a Republican plan that's going to pass and not House Bill 2066. So I have been working diligently with others in the creation of a Senate plan, a Senate alternative to Medicaid expansion. Because if it passed, we don't want Laura Kelly to pass it so that we find out what's in it. Because that's what will happen. That's what will happen. It'll be that bad. You know what's happened in the ACA. You know we've got major problems there. We're trying to get it repealed, and they're making some headway. But health care next year in the elections is going to be a huge topic on the national stage. So in looking at that, we are looking at two different waivers, 1332 and 1115. And I won't go into the detail of that, but one goes to the Office of Management and Budget, and the other goes to CMS. And what we're trying to do is, in the whole scheme of things, there's about 130 or 140,000 people out there that are subject to this, okay? 30 or 40,000 are now on the exchange, so they have private insurance coverage. It will be mandatory, if Medicaid expansion gets passed, it will be mandatory that they come off of that and they go on to Medicaid expansion. We don't want that. The first option that we're going to send in is that we would buy reinsurance to take care of the excess claims so that there's a neutral budget to the federal funding so that those people could remain on private insurance. If that doesn't fail, it goes to the next stage and on to the next stage. There's 3 things that need to be added to this product. The life amendment has to be on there, certainly before I'd even remotely extend it. The objection for religious conscience on performance measures, whatever they do in the way of a medical procedure or performance on a person. If a person objects, it'd have to be on there. And the final one is a work requirement. With South Carolina, we have now 11 states that have been approved for a work requirement. There have been liberal judges out there that have stopped the implementation of those work requirements. Kentucky, New Hampshire, Arkansas were the latest. And there's other states that have pulled their work requirements back because of that. But every state that's had Medicaid expansion and wanted a work requirement has gotten it. Tennessee's doing something a little bit different, but South Carolina has just got theirs approved. There's several ways to look at that work requirement too, on what to do, how to do it, and so forth. But we're going to have statistical information if this does pass, and if we can't keep some of our good senators in the fold, then we're going to have a stringent analysis of those individuals that are coming onto the plan and how we can get them into the workforce. We are working with the Department of Commerce on a process to take care of that. So I'm sure I'll get some questions at the end, which is fine, but Medicaid expansion for me, because I'm Chair of Public Health and Welfare, will be the biggest issue going back next year. Another issue in that area is foster kids. We are twice the national average of foster kids in care. I've talked to a number of people. I'm not sure why. I'd like to find out. But I think we need to do a better job keeping kids in the home. If there's a drug abuse or physical abuse, hey, we really got to take care of that and look at what is the real need of the child. If it's sanitary, if it's food, if it's things like that, things that people can help with, then we've got to keep these kids in their homes. We've got to do a better job in that. Another big issue is vaping. You hear all the news across the country. Any number of discussions we've had with KDHE and others, vaping is a problem. Now, there'll be some that'll say, well, we haven't had as many people die from vaping as we do cigarettes, but it's a problem with the youth in our schools. And it's becoming an epidemic and a distraction. And I'll go back to the disciplinary issue I mentioned earlier in schools. We've got to get a control on it because it is a major distraction in schools. So there could be several things. Of course, we could eliminate the flavored types of vape. We could raise the age and we could increase the taxes. So all of those things will be in discussion. Back on the Medicaid a little bit. We have got a problem with rural hospitals. Rural hospitals, we've got a declining population and an aging population out there. Okay, so some of these hospitals have 30 beds and they're losing money. We have 39 hospitals in the state that have 1 or 2 persons overnight. They can't make it on that. So we're working with the federal delegation to reclassify what consists of a hospital so the federal reimbursements don't change, but these hospitals can reconfigure so that they can have some emergency capability out there in these rural areas. We are so blessed here on the local level to have 2 of the best, finest major medical providers in the country with HCA and Ascension, and a great medical community itself. But we're going to see a change over the next several decades. I hope you're all with me. I may not see some of it, but we're going to see a real change happening out there in the rural area. But we need those rural areas to feed these hospitals so that they can do the necessary heart transplants and cancer treatment and stuff like that. Because if they don't do those often enough, they can't keep the specialists here. And then people will go to Oklahoma City and Denver and Omaha and elsewhere. So we have a problem, a bigger problem than just Medicaid expansion. We have a healthcare problem over the next several decades. If you've got ideas, I'm certainly open to listen.
And I know we're getting close to questions. There's just a couple things I want to mention, though, too, that I know are important to you all. And the rural issue, it's going to keep coming up. We don't face it so much here in Sedgwick County. Medicaid expansion is not going to save the rural hospitals. We need to be creative with other things too. So, okay, I know a lot of you are very interested in the Convention of States initiative. And I just feel like I have to bring it up because just last week, our Attorney General came out with an opinion that said in our Kansas Constitution, we say to change the federal Constitution, we have to have 2/3 vote of our state legislature. The Attorney General's opinion said that that is precatory language, meaning that is a wish in the a wish of Kansans, that's what they would like to see happen. But his opinion is that Kansas can't bind the federal Constitution in that way. I think as far as Convention of States, and that's an Article 5 convention that's called, if you all aren't familiar with that, that they have some specific things that they would like to change in the Constitution. But I think what we'll see this next session is passed through the Federal and State Affairs Committee in the House. We'll vote on it. It'll go to the Senate. Then it will just go through the regular procedure. But if we have to make a change and to talk about that precatory language in our Constitution, then that would probably happen later. Okay, just I'm just going to mention a few things that are coming up, but really not go in any detail. We're hoping to have a constitutional amendment at some point that will change the way Supreme Court justices are appointed or selected in Kansas. I know. It seems like the best bet would be adding a layer to that, which would be approval through the Senate process. So you need to be speaking to your representatives and senators about that. We talked about marijuana, caps on non-economic damages. I'm on the Judiciary Committee. That'll be coming up. Advanced practice RNs, that's the bill that got gutted for Medicaid expansion in the House. That's coming up. Similar dental assistants, anesthesiologist assistants, several things medically where people can do more things on their own, a little more autonomy in practicing would help the rural areas. And so that's what I have, Gene, and then we have about 10, you finish, and we have about 10 minutes for questions.
We're going to actually take about a 5-minute overtime, so we've got 15 right now.
Oh.
Okay. Transportation. Of course, we're working through that right now. We got the North Junction here locally that we need to kind of work out. But, folks, if you travel from the East Coast to the West Coast, north and south, Wichita doesn't really have a huge transportation problem. We've got a little bottleneck up there, but other than that, we got great roads. In the state, as far as our quality, we have always ranked in the top 5 in states on our roadways and at least top 10 in our bridges. So the thing that bothers me a little bit is you got to sprinkle a little bit of money to every county to get something done. That's not the best way to do it, but folks, that's the way it happens. In utilities, we are the highest ratepayer group in the 5-state region. We pay the highest rates per kilowatt. And again, we authorized a study of that because I think some rate increases were allowed in anticipation of federal legislation. That didn't come through, and therefore the rates are beyond what they should be. Ways and Means budget, we're going to work hard, try to keep it down. We're at a $7 billion SGF budget. Most of that's consumed by education, 52% for primary and another 11% for secondary, or I should say higher education. So a huge amount in education. The balance of that up until about 88% is health related, and then the balance of that is left for the remainder of our state operation. With that, Susan, I'll talk real quick.
Yes, right.
Elections next year. Huge consequences to Kansas. We've got a president that I think stands a very good chance to get elected. We all need to show up and support him. And the advantage of that is I think it'll bring plenty of our folks out to the polls to vote. We've got a historic Senate congressional election, and I think the right guy will show up for that as well. Not that there isn't a lady out there, but the right person, I should say, will show up for that. The House and the Senate, the State House and the Senate, along with the 4 congressional districts, are all up for a vote. And some prognosticators that are looking at some of these House and Senate races on the state level are projecting we could lose anywhere from 2 to 4 seats in the Senate. Doesn't look like we'll gain anything. We have some soft spots up in Johnson County, but we could lose 2 to 4. It could be 16, 24-16 or 27-13. We hope to get it as high as 28-12, but we won't know. But we do stand to gain some in the House. I think we've got some very good people running for the House. Some of them are coming from the House to the Senate. That's why we're having these openings. That's a traditional way of things happening. That's the way it happened for me. But I think we've got some great replacements coming in the House so that we can get a little better balance there as well. So with that, I guess we'll open it up for questions.
You asked a couple of questions. You said, when do we want to vote on the classification resolution? Do you want us to get those? I'm going to also start. We've got 3 people already, a lot of hands. So we'll start here. Some of you hopefully give you some answers.
As a medical doctor, Senator, I want to thank you for your comments. I got a few comments to make about medical marijuana. I mean, it's okay with me to prescribe, but not to everybody. There are some people with cancer, lung cancer, colon cancer, spread all over the body. They may have pain. So people like that can have marijuana. In other words, people suffering with terminal cancer. The second one is children less than 2 years of age having conversions. So I understand that they do better with marijuana. So for those kind of people, I agree to prescribe marijuana, but not to everybody. The second thing is, I'm sorry, just 1 second. The other thing is about medical, I'm sorry. The other thing is about that, I'm sorry. You mentioned about nurse practitioners. Nurse practice, they're working. I used to work in rural Kansas. I used to have nurse practitioners working for me. They're good, but I don't think they should be on their own. They should work under the supervision of a medical doctor.
And, I'll just say I've heard it from a lot of, I'm thinking maybe that's kind of a question, so I'll just jump in if that's okay. So I've heard from a lot of people, that's probably, besides Convention of States, that's the one issue I've heard most from my constituents, for it and against it. So we're listening very closely, and we're looking to see what other states have done also, and if there's been repercussions. So, yeah, thank you for that comment. Mm-hmm. Yep.
As far as marijuana is concerned, I'm going to pretty much follow the CDC on what their outcome is and suggestions.
So, when you guys talk about Medicaid expansion, why do you always assume that the federal government is going to pay 90% of the cost with the ever-looming federal budget deficit? You can't expect them to pay 90%. They will eventually want to say 20%, 30%, maybe 50%.
You're right, and in this bill and any other legislation that anybody will vote for is if it goes below 90%, it will cease. That's been loud and clear in anything anybody's ever considered, so it will stop. And the way that it's going to work is there'll be no new applications for immediately. There'll be no new applications, and those that are on it will have 1 year to get off.
Thank you all for coming and sharing. This may already have been settled, but I know a lot of sales now are happening online, and I don't know if we're recovering all the sales tax we need, or if there's a way to do that. Can you all address that?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
The Kelly administration has gone out after first dollar sales tax online out of state. Now, to me, this is my own personal philosophy. We're not raising taxes on anybody. We're collecting the taxes that they owe based on the purchases, regardless of where they come from. We have small business, brick and mortar folks out there that pay local property tax, hire people, make investments, grow the employment level, and so forth. So what we're doing is we're collecting the use tax from those persons paying it, purchasing things out of state, and trying to level the playing field. We will have to adjust that. I think we need to come up with 100,000 or maybe 250,000 basis on the sales, the groups that are selling things in the state here as the minimum threshold on where we can go for them for taxes.
Yeah, I would just say, we passed that some bill regulating that with some of those safeguards in place, and the governor vetoed it, and then she went ahead and did her own thing. So we will be trying to work on that. Yep.
Question back here.
Gene and Susan, thanks for your service. Thanks for the comments today. I wanted to ask about the tax credit program on education. And you may not know the answer to this, but just kind of curious, is there a state model out there that we would like to replicate that's been successful? I know there's other states doing tax credit programs, and I've heard like Arizona has a tax credit program, a voucher system that they can use not only for just certain schools, but for anybody.
So I'll take a stab at that. There's different ways that families can have education freedom. Vouchers is one where they're given vouchers to go to private schools. Education savings accounts are another, where parents are given, for instance, it's like healthcare savings accounts where you get a Visa card and you can use it for any education expenses, and that would be books, uniforms, homeschool. And then there's the tax credit scholarships. There's also charter schools. Most states that are successful are doing some combination of those things. And so far in Kansas, we only have the tax credit scholarship. So we'd like to look at other states to see other ways for parents to have a better choice for their children. But I think for the tax credit scholarship, we're doing it in a way that's sustainable. It's great. It's 70% credit on your state tax return. So I think that's kind of settled, but we need to look at other ways that other states are doing too.
Last year, we tried to pass the benefits on to everyone on the Jobs and Tax Act that was passed on the congressional level. We got it vetoed twice, so we weren't able to do that, but you can rest assured we'll be trying to get that passed again. We've got foreign corporations that are going to be taxed on out-of-state income that they're earning that has never been taxed before. We're still coupled with the federal government, so we want to decouple so people can have their own itemization levels here in the state. So that whole thing itself, we're going to run at it again.
Question back here.
What are the chances of getting religious liberty restored in Kansas in 2020?
Religious liberty. I don't know what specifically area you're speaking on, but as you know, the federal government, the Trump administration has done some excellent things recently, especially with adoption and child placing agencies. Of course, we passed that in Kansas. And like we talk about our foster care problem. Well, we need to make sure there's a faith-based initiative with no regulations, that they are able to serve the families and the children that they would like to serve. So we're pushing it, and I think we have the backing of the federal government to push it also. So if you have ideas on those areas, let us know, because I hear you on that.
Okay, got a question over here.
With the new impeachment guidelines established by the U.S. House, will we be impeaching Governor Kelly this year?
Impeachment guidelines. Well, we'll pass on that one. You're welcome.
Susan's on the Judiciary Committee. I'm not.
Again, thank you both for coming today and for your service. I am a test prep professional, and I have 3 out of my 9 students that I know for sure are National Merit Scholars now this year. One of them had to go up 11 points in his English to get there, and from on his ACT, and he just had never got it. So I mean, we're just letting our upper level students, and our tax credit system is only for the poor students, so it doesn't give any hope for the upper level students. You have to be a low performing student. Now, my good friend John Extel is not here today, so I'm going to ask his question for you, Mr. Suellentrop. Unfortunately, his wife passed away yesterday, so and their services will be Monday. Majority Leader Hopkins recognizes truthfully that the Kansas State Supreme Court will do anything it wants to force an Obamacare expansion bill to provide for taxpayer-funded abortion. With that said, why would you allow Jim Denning's bill to be heard in your committee? Would you dare risk the lives of Kansas babies on the decisions of a rogue Kansas court? or a constitutional amendment that could take a long time?
Again, going back to my earlier comment that if there's a bill, it's going to pass. It's going to pass with restrictions in it. At least that's the way I'm going to vote. That will address that specific issue as well. We're working with a number of good people, ADF, the Alliance for Defense Freedom, which again, if you don't want to bake a cake for the wrong couple, then and you get sued, they back you up on that. We're working with the Catholic Conference as well, and so we're addressing both the life issue as well as the religious objection issue. So I know it's a very highly political issue, but we want to have something that makes more sense than no sense, and those things have to be on there for me to vote for it. I will not support it.
Well, until we get the Supreme Court straightened out, you can't make it.
I can't.
Please.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just add to that too. We're well aware that Medicaid expansion in Connecticut, I think I just heard, something like 50% of the abortions in Connecticut are taxpayer funded. We're well aware that that is a pitfall of Medicaid expansion. And so because we do have a pro-life vast majority, I don't know if it's a 2/3 majority in the Senate and the House, we're well aware of that, and that will be taken into consideration, definitely.
Got 2 more questions.
Okay.
First one here's a short one.
Okay, if the development of our plan stops it from passing at all and gives these senators a viable option to say no, that's the objective.
Okay, quick question here.
This is a different kind of question. I know you're in your 4th year of your term. Are you going to run for another 4?
I haven't decided yet. I haven't filed yet. I've got to make that decision here fairly quick. There's a couple of things that are coming up that are going to be critical. 2 things in particular. In 2020 we'll have our census. In 2022 we will have our redistricting. And it is going to be so important that we have the right people in there for redistricting. I was in there in 2012. We did a great job. We passed it like 114 to 8 in the House, very nonpartisan, but it was tied up into the Senate. The Senate then couldn't come to an agreement and went to the courts. I was a Republican House Campaign Committee chair. Shortly after that, we got 96 good Republicans elected to the House. Jan Pauls from Hutchinson came over from the Democrat Party. We had 97. We got some great things done. Now, I will tell you that I don't think whatever we put out there for redistricting, Kelly will agree to, and it'll probably end up in the courts as well. Secondarily, of course, she is up for election, and if I can have any impact on that for her not getting back in there, I'll do that too. So.
Last question.
Okay.
Good day, and thank you. Very informative. I'm a CPA, and I'm working with a client to get a restaurant opened in Wichita. The Department of Revenue, the alcoholic beverage, the City of Wichita Health Department, there's about 5 different licenses, and of course, everyone of them wants money. The licensing questionnaires are very similar. While you're working on licensing, why can't that be coordinated, send it to the Department of Revenue, and they can disseminate it?
Yeah, isn't that true with everything? Communication. You know, if we could just get the state, the local and the state to talk and communicate. And I mean, Gene probably has a more technical answer to that question, but I just will assure you there are a lot of us that think less regulation is always better, and we need to share data, and we need to do those things so that we can have a thriving business community in Kansas. But Gene may have a more expert answer on that one.
ABC's is a part of Department of Revenue, but ABC sent a request back asking for stuff that had already been filed with the Department of Revenue.
Communication.
And I talked to a young lady, and she said, well, it's in our notes. I said, obviously somebody didn't bother to do any work, research.
It is one of the parts of the bill that we're going to be looking at in commerce, having to do with licensing, the simplification of it, and allowing those coming in from out of state to immediately be licensed if they're in good standing. So, yes, it'll be looked at.
Thank you.
Thank you.